Television is not the truth. Television is a goddamn amusement park. Television is a circus, a carnival, a traveling troupe of acrobats, storytellers, dancers, singers, jugglers, sideshow freaks, lion tamers, and football players. We're in the boredom-killing business. So turn off your television sets. Turn them off now. Turn them off right now. Turn them off and leave them off. Turn them off right in the middle of the sentence I'm speaking to you now. Turn them off.
Stop them. An idea whose time has come cannot be stopped by any army.
Welcome to TLBTV. And I am your host, Roger Landry, the founder of the Liberty Beacon Project. And as everybody knows, these shows are done when we have special guests or special topics we feel everybody needs to be informed of. As everybody who follows the Liberty Beacon Project knows by now, I spent a very, very large portion of my life either in or working for the military in this country, whether it was tooling around under the ocean on a nuclear submarine or facilitating DoD contracts for Raytheon. I also spent a great deal of my life, almost 80% of every year for 2 decades outside of this country. So I'm not only aware of the politics within this country, but I'm also aware of how the United States is looked upon from outside of this country. Today we're going to be discussing the politics, global politics. Again, how does the world see the United States? How does politics influence the military in this country? And what are the ramifications of that? Now, I'm joined by my co-host, and everybody, of course, can see her, and that is the lovely Rebecca Mahan. And you can't find a more intelligent or on-the-ball individual on the planet, and we're always proud to have her on this show. And we're no longer going to be calling Gregory a guest. Greg Ford is now a full-time contributor on issues of intelligence and counterintelligence for the Liberty Beacon Project. And of course, he's got his sunglasses. Are you mocking me here, my friend? Okay, here we go.
Well, so, maybe I should get in on the action too.
Oh, God, look at this. All right. Well, our third guest, who you're going to introduce, and we're so proud to have, is here by phone because she's on an island and her internet connection is not that great. So we have no video, so she can't put her glasses on. So, but again, before we bring her in, what we all need to understand is there's very, very little that we know. And this is called programmed ignorance. And what is the mission statement of the Liberty Beacon Project? It's the eradication of programmed ignorance. The programmed ignorance is we are told what they feel we should know. We are herded like cattle via the information that is leaked through sources such as CNN or other complicit mainstream media to formulate our attitudes and what we believe. This is exactly why the Liberty Beacon Project is here, the eradication of programmed ignorance. Today, we have a very special guest, don't we, Rebecca? And why don't you tell everybody who it is? Because I am literally just antsy in my chair to start a discussion with this individual.
I am as well. Today we have with us someone who is just absolutely incredible in what she has done for her life and for her country. With us is General Janice Karpinski. She is a career, or has been a career officer in the United States Army Reserve. She is now retired, but most notably, she is notable for commanding forces that operated at Abu Ghraib and other prisons in Iraq in 2003 and 2004. There was scandal going on at that time, which she is probably going to share with us quite a bit of information about today, that's related to torture and prisoner abuse. And on top of that, she commanded 3 of the prisons in Iraq and ran that. So unbelievable background and experience, but not just on that side. Her education, she has a Bachelor of Arts in English, a secondary in education, a master's in aviation management, and a master's in strategic studies from the Army War College. And
Wow.
she is just, I gotta tell you, having been in the military and knowing that we've got a general on show, I'm a little nervous because you know how it is with the chain of the command. But I love it. I'm super excited to have her. And welcome, General Karpinski.
Thank you very much. And nobody has to be nervous about anything because we, this is a perfect forum for a conversation. And so open the discussion. I'm ready for anything, and I'm so happy to be able to participate, and I certainly appreciate the invitation to join you.
Well, we appreciate it as well. And being a civilian contractor for many, many years, most of my discussions were with commodores, admirals, captains, colonels. So it was something I got quite used to, but I was only an E6 when I left the military. So yeah, there was a big difference in that world. But first off, I want to give huge kudos to the individual who brought you to our attention. And that is my good friend, and of course, our intel and counter-intel, okay, there we go with the glasses, contributor, Greg Ford. Greg, how are you today, my friend?
I'm in fine form, Roger, and I'm glad to be speaking to everybody, including Janice, because that's how we basically met, was trying to get my intelligence reports to the general. And it took 15 years finally to get my reports to her, but now is the time to get this story out. And the important thing about this story, it's affecting who the president of the United States is, and the policies that we have, and the foreign policies. And the most critical thing is now the former president is issuing pardons to the people that were directly involved in these situations. The torture situation, the political assassination situation, that is happening right now. So what Janice has to say, what I have to say, affects everything right to the moment of this country and its foreign policy.
Well, I would say that it's a little late for him to be doing any of that now because he is a goner. He said his bye-byes yesterday. So any damage you could do in that area, the time is well past. All right, Janice, I really, really want to open the door for you. So let's start this all off by you telling the audience what you wish them to know about you and a little bit about the controversy that stirred up so vehemently in Iraq, and as a result of this, the political fallout that you suffered. Please.
Well, I just want to say very, very quickly, so we have time for more vigorous discussion or questions. But I had my Army career was both in the regular Army and the Army Reserves, and I spent almost 7 years in the United Arab Emirates. I was deployed on Desert Storm, and I was an operations officer and did targeting. And even the act of recommending targets, there was a strict code to adhere to. You could not target civilian locations, hospitals, religious facilities, mosques, or anything else. We were very specific to adhere to the law that governs war, the Geneva Conventions included. So I was very familiar with that. I then went to the United Arab Emirates and set up a women's military training program, and I stayed there to manage the entire operation. Then I left and I came back, and I commanded a military police battalion, and their mission was prisoner of war operations. The soldiers were very familiar with the Geneva Conventions, all of the rules that apply. And, the way reserve units operate and they hone their skills, if you will, is throughout the year, they go for 2 weeks, or they'll have a week of training or additional training, so that the adherence to the Geneva Conventions and the rules of war were trained throughout the years.
I have a real quick question for you, Janice, right now. Answer me this real quick, because this is going to lead into a lot of this information. You did, in fact, have private contractors also influencing what was going on a daily basis in these facilities, right? And a lot of times,
absolutely,
having been a private contractor, a lot of times they don't march to the same drum, do they?
No, and I think that's a critically important point, because Desert Storm, you know, it was the war of 72 hours. So that was the training, and there was a lot of kudos given to the Reserve and National Guard units that deployed because they did such an exceptional job. It rested 90% on the shoulders of the Reserve and the National Guard from Desert Storm. So when Iraqi freedom rolled around, everybody expected, I mean, commanders of divisions and maybe the people in Washington, D.C. intentionally led them to believe that this was going to be another short war, a short invasion and success and then withdrawal. Well, it was never intended that way, ever. But what happened was the war continued. It became like a giant tidal wave. And they had to bring in contractors without training, without really, like you said, adherence to any law. They certainly didn't have to adhere to the Geneva Conventions. You would think that they put something in place in their orders when they were brought onto into the equation, but they did not. They did not adhere to anything. The rules of war, the Geneva Conventions, they were completely free running.
Yeah,
and
completely free running, and they didn't answer so much to the military structure as they did to the civilian structure. Now, just let me hold you just for a second right there, because I do want you to continue, but I want that perspective from Greg right now, because Greg was there as you were there as a non-com, and you saw things, again, from a slightly different perspective. What did you see as far as the contractors go, as far as the difference in adherence to not only the laws and the rules that we in the military had to follow, but again, so far outside of it that it dropped your jaw sometimes?
Absolutely. Now, what I saw, and part of my job, besides being a counterintelligence agent, was being an intelligence analyst. And I remember before I was sent to Iraq was something like this, is the Bush administration intentionally notifying the Geneva Convention control authorities that we would not be adhering to any Geneva Conventions. And there was quite a stir over that. And as far as I can tell now, as of this date, that was intentional. It was intentional to actually prevent any kind of judicial examination of such an issue as torture, all right? An international explosive issue like torture, which it turned out to be. And later on, I didn't have the information then, but very clearly the United States was intentionally planning on integrating torture as a tool of state policy. And I got that information from a source at King Khalid Air Base in Saudi Arabia, 1990. And that was when the first actual test bed was done and run by our people, our intelligence people, and also contractors. Contractors were there on site. And what happened was two things. First of all, torture was actually exposed as something that attracts everybody's attention. When you do something, when you show naked bodies, when you show people in agony, it gets everybody's attention. And from one of my sources who was there translating English to Arabic, Arabic to English, he stated that it was a upcoming policy to use torture as a tool of redirection for war profiteering, covering the efforts of war profiteering.
I not only do I agree, but I saw a lot of the same. And again, I wasn't quite in the thick that either you or Janice was in, but I was the guy who was leading the emergency teams all around the planet to fix military equipment that wasn't operating, especially in situations where they needed sensors and so on and so forth. Janice, I want you to continue. I love the perspective that Gregory brings into these type of issues, but please continue with your story.
Well, I think that it's, again, Greg is absolutely right that, this was not something that was decided on the ground, but it was implemented because it was urgent, and then they had no means to cover it up any longer. And it was very early on because Greg was there, the intelligence people come in early on. And if everybody can recall that the Declaration of Mission Accomplished implied the war was over. And when that happens, then it becomes, well, you don't have to adhere to the Geneva Conventions because there's no war. Prisoners are not called prisoners of war any longer. Now they're just called prisoners, and which then morphed over time to call them security detainees. And according to the senior JAG officer in Iraq at the time, because I said, what is that category? He said, well, we don't really know, but they don't have any rights at all. And I said to him, you can't hold people without rights, you're not going to tell them what they're guilty of? We don't have to. I said, are they prisoners under Iraq law? No, there is no law under Iraq. This is U.S. law. I said, listen, the U.S. doesn't behave this way. And he said, they do here because the rules are different. I looked at him and I said, you mean there's no rules?
Hold on 1 second, because you know what? You're so absolutely right. And you made such a sterling point that I absolutely have to jump in here. And I know you're going to want to say something to this, Rebecca. I really do. But let me just correct one fine point. At that point in time, that's a sterling point you just made, Janice. It really, really is. But now let's remember the NDAA. Let's remember that in the United States, they can bust your door down at 2 o'clock in the morning, drag you kicking and screaming out, throw you into a vehicle, take you to a detention center, and hold you without any justification, without any reason, indefinitely. It's called indefinite detention, and there's no due process. So are we seeing a mirroring of what was utilized against these poor individuals in what was termed a war zone in the very country that we all scream at the top of our lungs is the freest country on the planet? And you say, Rebecca?
Due process.
Yeah, no due process.
And I will tell you, I would say 99% of soldiers, American soldiers, when they are told do whatever it takes to get information, many of them said no, I will not. Many of them. Now there were some frustrated units. There's no denying it, and they took to the baseball bats and the beating people under their control in these, holding them in temporary confinement facilities. But soldiers know the law. So when they're told by their commanders, go out there and do whatever it takes, and that information, Greg could probably give you the exact date. There was a message that was released from an intelligence major at the time, who served in Afghanistan, and when he was transferred to Iraq, he sent out a blitz message and said, okay, the gloves come off. Do whatever it takes to get these guys to talk. At that time, they were still looking for the whereabouts of Saddam Hussein. And the soldiers just said, what are they saying? That, the gloves come off. 99% of the soldiers, they found a way to not be involved in it. However, more and more contractors are pouring in, and they have no problem with doing whatever it takes. And many of them were experienced from Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, Gitmo, or Afghanistan. And they were specifically brought into Iraq because of their fine skills in doing whatever it took to get people to talk and give information, whether it was legitimate information or completely false, didn't seem to make a difference.
Just say something so it all stops. All right, I'm going to take you up on that. Go. Excuse me, Rebecca?
No, that was going to be my earlier question to Greg, and this just sort of now closes the circle, because basically what I'm hearing, and maybe those who are watching will also be questioning, is that then this becomes an issue where the majority of tortures and possibly assassinations came from contractors. And the question is then, what fields were they in?
And well, what is their culpability?
Yeah.
And Greg,
there is no culpability. Many of them did not have any background in intelligence or security or interrogation. Their skill was they spoke 2 languages. So they were brought over as translators. There was a huge demand for translators. And the ulterior motive, of course, was to bring them in and say, oh, as a translator, you make $25,000 for 6 months. If we make you a translator and an interrogator, you could double that salary or triple that salary or whatever the extent was.
That's
so
great.
Now you have people that are completely untrained as interrogators, but they can translate, they know both languages, and they jump at the chance to be making more money over there. And that's exactly what happened. Were there some excellent translators who were not participating as interrogators? Absolutely, there were. But what happened in the process of this huge demand for people that had the Arabic language skill was some people that were already there as translators then called back to their headquarters in Washington, D.C. and said, look, I found 6 locals that can speak English as well as Arabic. I'm going to bring them on. Can you send over contracts? And sometimes they hand wrote the contracts right there to get these people on, and they all got paid. But none of them that were hired locally, not one of them had the background training in intelligence or interrogation.
Janice,
and that was.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but from my understanding, from those that I have known who have either considered the position or they themselves have went over, weren't the contractors that were deployed then on 1-year terms. So being the case that they were not trained, they go over there and they're there for only 1 year. Now we have a new set of contractors coming in that are untrained. So even those ones that are having what's considered OJT, on the job training, that could have actually been an asset in the long run, now we have them leaving back to the US and we're bringing in new untrained personnel.
I would actually like to hear Greg's point of view on that, because you were right in the thick with them, weren't you? I mean, you were shoulder to shoulder with these guys every day, and you probably ate in a mess hall with them and, went out and had a few beers in the evening with them. I mean, these are people that you dealt with on a daily basis, right?
Well, there wasn't too much beer involved. But,
okay. I was just trying to
Muslim country. But here's the situation, and I concur with Janice entirely, and by the way, there is a massive federal court case, besides mine, going on right now concerning CIA contractors that were at Abu Ghraib. I believe one is Emos and Mitchell. That case, two non-military contractors. They were psychologists, and this is where it gets real sticky, is the psychologists, they had no anthropology training, no cultural training, no military training, no judicial training, all right? They just knew how to be psychologists. And they put these two clowns right in the middle of one of the most dangerous situations, which is interrogation on an international basis. When you say interrogation, quite often that means extermination, all right? So most of the countries of the world, that means torture and extermination. So they put these two jokers in charge at Abu Ghraib, and that proceeded to launch one of the most disastrous intelligence collection campaigns of all time. They are now being sued for millions and millions of dollars, along with the agency, for their behavior. And of course, Janice is right. What was it? They were paid on an hourly basis as psychologists, and it was something like $25 an hour or something, $50 an hour. But if they assumed the cloak of interrogation, they made several $100s an hour. So what are they going to do? They're going to call themselves interrogators. And just about the time when all hell was beginning to break loose, along comes, and Janice will confirm this, some great big overrated joker by the name of General Jeffrey Miller. And Jeffrey Miller shows up, AKA Crazy Jeff, okay? And he was an expert in artillery, all right? He never had a moment of intelligence training or interrogation training. And Jeff shows up. I actually met him at the airport because my commanding officer, who was one of the defendants in my court case now, actually went out and did the meet and greet thing with him. And he stated there in the communications center at Balad that he was there to, quote, get mo eyes, Abu Ghraib, all right? And that is exactly what proceeded to happen. And it turned into be the biggest mess, the most explosive global mess one has ever seen. And now, as a result of this last election, we are not only seeing Bradley Manning being given a pardon, but you're soon to see Julian Assange. Both of those people were party to the information being sent out about what was being done at Abu Ghraib. And that's why our government has particularly beaten these poor people down, beaten Bradley Manning down, had him in prison for 3 decades until this pardon, and Julian Assange, okay, who is going to make statements concerning myself, the general, and several other people that were at Abu Ghraib in the intelligence capacity. And Julian Assange has the documents proving that the command knew exactly what they were doing and how they were going to deal with people like myself, who said, no, we're not going to torture anybody anymore. We are going to follow the Geneva Conventions. And what happened to me and the general, that's coming out soon to be happening. So yes.
I appreciate your input on that, but I do want to upgrade one thing, because in the heat of your conversation, which was absolutely brilliant, this is the type of information that we love having you around for, Gregory. Chelsea Manning, which it is now Chelsea Manning, by the way, was not in prison for 3 decades. She's barely that old. So it was 3 years. Okay? But you did say 3 decades. So we don't want to.
I think she was sentenced to 30 years.
Right.
And she only served a portion of it, right?
I think it was like 3 or 4 years. But we only have an hour on this show. And with the 4 people we have here, we could do this for 10 hours. So
really, we could.
What I would like you to do, Janice, at this point, first up, you're both going to be invited back for show number 2. And we'll probably run a mini-series on this for at least a couple of shows, because there's no way in hell we're going to get all of the information that's pertinent and germane to this topic out in 1 hour. It's just not going to happen. But in the type of media we have online today, if a show goes longer than an hour, you lose interest. So best to break it up into several different shows where we focus on different portions of the topic in each one. Today we're talking about the torture, we're talking about the political fallout, and we're talking about the politics that necessitates it. All right, so that's where I'd like you to go right now, Janice, okay? I want you to put this into perspective, okay? When you got back here and President Bush basically stated or instituted a reduction in rank for you, which I don't agree with at all. And some of the political fallout that you must have received for this. And then between you and Greg, let's explain to the audience how that bleeds off into what we're seeing today. Now, Greg, you opened the door, but I'd like to get a little bit more information on that. But Janice, please start by talking to us about the political side of this and what you went through. You don't reduce a general in rank unless, of course, you're a president who's just been embarrassed.
But I have to tell you, and I will do this very quickly, when I came back to the United States, because they held me in Iraq, I believe to this day, I believe it was to prevent a different story getting to the media. But nonetheless, the sitting general who was there at the time, he was down in Kuwait, McKiernan, he finally released me, said, look, you have a great career ahead of you, put this behind you, and good luck to you. And I came back to the United States with that in my head. And nobody to this day, there has not been one senior officer, not a Donald Rumsfeld, not anybody who called me into an office, told me why, faced me, and gave me the reasons. They just simply sent a paper to me and said, you are not a general officer.
Ouch. That's
Ouch.
just that's freaking.
To this day, not one of these brave hearts ever faced me and told me what they were doing.
Well,
I never had a day in court. Lindsey Graham made the comment during one presentation that I should have been court-martialed. And I mean,
okay,
it is so bizarre.
You're saying Lindsey Graham, you're saying Donald Rumsfeld, you're saying, all right, look, I've got to tell you something. There are many Americans, more Americans awake today than there have ever been in my lifetime. And I'm 62 years old, okay? And I'm looking at, as a result of whether you like Trump or not, he has stirred the pot in this country. And there are a massive amount of Americans who are peeking from around those blinds of ignorance that they've all been hidden behind. So when you say the names Rumsfeld, or you say the names Lindsey Graham, or you say the name John McCain, or you say, okay, everybody's immediately realizing that something ain't good here. Something isn't.
That's right.
Good here.
And then
that's right. All of these, remember, and all of these people had their fingers either on the Senate Intelligence Committee or in the decision to go to war or the continuation of war, or like Dick Cheney's previous company, Halliburton, because they were the first ones on the ground. If this is a surprise war, if you will, how in the world do you have hundreds and then thousands of contractors immediately available to be deployed and run mess halls, do translations, do laundry facilities, everything under the Halliburton contract?
I really hate to interrupt you, but I'm going to tell you why, and you probably know this, and I would actually like you to speak about this when I've made my comment, Greg, and that is because in late 1997, a specific general went in to visit his friends at the Pentagon, and while he was there, he was told and shown paperwork backing up, this is prior to 9/11, okay, several years prior, that the United States had all intent on going in and attacking 5 nations in the Middle East, 5 nations, and literally bringing them under the boot heel. So this was in the planning 4, 5, 6 years before it actually happened, and 3 years before 9/11 actually happened. So for anybody to say, how could these people be ready to jump in when this just happened? They were ready to jump in 2 years before that. Greg, how far off am I?
Not very far. And I think it's all confirmed at the inauguration yesterday when I saw George W. Bush glaring at Donald Trump, all right? And And what that means is something called copper green, one of the most amazing war profiteering schemes and projects based on political assassination and torture. All right. And that is going to come out very shortly. And that's what's critical here.
So let me
Rebecca, you look like you're just itching to say something.
I am, because you made a really good point in that there is a lot of people that are just now starting to become aware that this type of thing isn't conspiratorial, it is the truth. And we have a lot of people that are now starting to come out and tell their stories, the things that they have seen, the truth in what has been going on. But the question might come up for some, and what was the initial reasoning behind doing all this that has created, as Greg says, such a hot mess? I mean, why?
Janice, why?
I think the idea of world domination was
Empire.
We have the ability to control the world, and if you say that amongst yourselves in a very small select circle of people, you start to believe it, and then you say, we have the chance to execute this. We have to start now. We'll have to do this, and maybe the players change in the process, so you end up, for example, you go into Iraq, you think this is going to be another 72-hour or 1-week war or something, and then you say, no, wait a minute, things have gone off the rails here. Well, the main players, though, in that small select circle would be Cheney and Rumsfeld and their closest associates who were probably carrying the money bags
Those names
to be
keep
able to
coming
launch
up.
this project.
Those names keep coming up over and over again. Let me throw in a fact, and see, this is my strong point, Janice, is that I'm a walking encyclopedia, okay? I have so many facts stuffed away in my head. It's insane. But for most people who don't understand, when we talk about empire, when we talk about the influence that the United States with the big stick, and these are the oligarchs who control the United States, not we the people. Okay, the oligarchs who in fact control our Congress, who control our presidency, who control the big stick of the military. Let me give you a fact you can chew on. All right, there are 194 nations on this planet, of which it has been estimated at least 170 of them have U.S. military forces either overtly or covertly in them. If you can describe a global empire any better than that, I dare you to try. I just told you 170 out of 194 countries on this planet either have overt or covert military U.S. forces on their sovereign territory. That's scary.
That is scary. That is scary. And it would be interesting to see a timeline on when they were placed in certain countries.
Absolutely.
And how much money was promised for that privilege of stationing military in the country.
To the dictators,
because it's all connected to. That's right. That's right. You talk about dictators. You put the word dictator and associate it with some behavior from the United States government, it is very troubling. And and I think Gregory would have similar experiences in this particular deployment, in this war. There were so many times when I kind of like looked and I said, "What?" And it was usually the 3 stars. They were, if Rumsfeld was coming in to visit or something, oh my gosh, these people, these general officers, they were reduced to, a lot of them were just reduced to blathering. I can't even describe it. They wouldn't stand up to this man. They wouldn't challenge what he was saying. They were more concerned about the political aspects of their careers and survival than they were about taking care of soldiers or doing the right things or the military aspects of their rank. And it was Very disturbing.
I not only agree, but you made a sterling point. Please, Gregory, enlighten
Yeah.
us with what you saw on this, because I know you got something to say.
Well, first of all, the president who just left yesterday, very few people know this, all right? But I'll inform them. That president, President Obama, the ex-president now, actually, as a result of Iraq and what has gone on unchallenged for the last 11, 12 years, he can now order, okay, the new president now can order, as he could, Obama could, the torture of any U.S. citizen he wanted tortured, all right? And also, and
Indefinite
as I
attempt
tell
detention.
people, as I tell your listeners, don't believe me. He can, the president now in the United States can order any U.S. citizen assassinated, killed, without due process, without notifying anybody, without explaining himself. I don't think there's too much difference now between a dictator and somebody that wields that kind of power.
Well, hold on, Greg, because basically what I said to Janice's comment not too long ago was that everything we had seen, or at least the intent of what we are discussing in Abu Ghraib and places like that overseas, are basically maybe not taken to the extreme, but the basic structure, okay? The framework for these exact same atrocities are now built into the NDAA. They can drag you out of your home at 3 o'clock in the morning, throw you in prison for the rest of your life with zero justification, and no day in court. No day in court. Or the president can say, you know, send a drone out, kill this dude, I don't like him, with zero ramifications. This exists in America today. Who listening to this show would ever have thought you would live in a country where that was doable? Wake up, you do.
And all under the banner of counterterrorism. All right, that's what this has all happened under. The last thing I'd like to say, and Janice can appreciate this, is something like this. Billions and billions of dollars went into Iraq and disappeared. That was the payoff for several of our allies. For Tony Blair, the British Prime Minister, who ordered the disposal of weapons of mass destruction, he was paid, and several of the countries that are now involved in copper green and all the atrocities that includes are paid and were paid through something called the Cyprus Express. And
I got a question for you, Greg. Do you kind of tie this into the Rumsfeld announcement on September 10th, okay, whereby he states that there's about $3 trillion out of the military budget that cannot be accounted for, and then the very next day, the Pentagon and the offices in the trade towers that could have accounted for that money or the path of that money were utterly destroyed? Is this a coincidence?
No, it's not.
It's a tragedy. It's just a tragedy.
Run with this, Janice, please.
Mm-hmm. Well, Greg and I have talked about the money, and you know there was so
$3 trillion? My God!
Yeah, but remember this, and this is what Greg was saying, and what he was alluding to, the Cyprus Express. In the first year of the war, when there were regular army units from the United States or from Germany that were deployed, thinking that they were going to go home after 30 days and then 90 days, and then thinking, you know, I mean, I had a provost marshal in one of the units from Germany say to me, he was a colonel, he said to me, "Ma'am, we're so glad that you're here because now we can go back to Germany." And I said, "What do you mean you can go back to Germany?" He said, "Yes, we go back and we get refreshed." And I said, "And what about the Reserve and National Guard units that were expecting to be here for 30 days and not longer than 179? But you guys can stay." I mean, he's like talking to me like, you know, doesn't this make sense to you? And we had in the provost marshal's office, or the police office under Bremer, Ambassador Bremer, we had 4 civilian contractors who knew nothing about what they were supposed to be doing, except that they were supposed to create a police force, a Iraqi police department. They couldn't speak the language. They didn't like the Iraqis. They had no clue on how to do training of any kind. So, of course, the military police picked up that ball and carried it. But in that process, they took pictures repeatedly, sometimes near the airport, sometimes down at Bremer's headquarters, right in the embassy there, or the old embassy. They'd be sitting on these pallets of US dollars that were just picked up from the airport. Millions of dollars that were coming in. They were being shuttled in every day, and pallets of money. And I talked to these 2 guys that were the ones that were taking the money to Cyprus every day. And I said to them, this was around the time, this conversation took place around the time when they were doing the new Iraqi money was being printed, and Iraqis were being told that they could exchange 1 for 1. And if they didn't want to exchange 1 old dinar for 1 new dinar, they could change so many for dollars. So that's why all this U.S. money was coming in to Iraq. That's what these guys told me. But they were taking it to Cyprus because it was no longer accountable. And that was the justification for shipping all of these millions of dollars over by pallets. And this, the Cyprus Express, every day they made a run, and they deposited the money. And after the first year, the Army Audit Agency got involved, and they looked at everything. And there was, that was the first year now, $3.4 or $5 billion not accountable. They went to Bremer.
That's a huge.
And Bremer's, it's a huge chunk of money.
It is. But what I need to find out right now is, Rebecca, how much time do we have left?
Actually, we're coming up to where it's getting pretty close.
Okay, what I would like to do here is, Rebecca, you step in, ask anything, make any comment you'd wish at this point. Then I would like to go to Greg and then Janice. Each one of you give us a wrap-up statement, and then I will close the show out. I want to tell everybody listening, and Janice, I'm hoping that you will jump on board with this. We're going to do a round 2 on this conversation because we're still in the past on this conversation.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
All the way up to exactly what's happening today. So we need to do a part 2 and possibly even a part 3. So let's start the ball off with you, please, Rebecca, and then we'll pass it to our good friend and contributor, Greg, and then Janice, you'll get the final, well, I'll get the final word, but you'll get to the second to the final word.
So, yes, you asked if I had any questions left. The only final one is this Cyprus Express is Greg, Janice, still continuing as of right now, correct?
Well, there's no reason to believe it's not. There's still money that's unaccountable.
Okay.
Good answer.
Well, and the reason I say that is because here just a couple of months ago, the most recent media publishing of money that was found on pallets and was being, helicoptered out or whatever the case may be. And so that leads me to believe that everything that both of you have just shared indicates that this is an extension of Cyprus Express, or it is still the Cyprus Express. So from what I have heard, based on everything that we've talked about, there are at least 3 to 4 major topics that we'll need to cover, because that will really be able to bring about a total encompassing of what is really going on. And we've got everything from torture to the contractors to the Cyprus Express to even what you have not brought up is drug trafficking, which is combined in all of this. And so I think that, Roger, there's going to be more than probably, like you said, this is going to end up having to be a miniseries. And I am hoping, Greg and Janice, that you will both be willing to invest some time in this, because I do think that this is something that we need to bring Americans awareness levels up on.
Amen.
Amen. Okay, here, it's all you, Mr. Greg, please.
Okay, it'd be my pleasure. Okay, in the last few days, I have spoken to the former committee that did the investigation by Henry Waxman. Okay, this was done in 2006, 2007. He very carefully laid out how that money was taken and stolen out of Iraq. It was U.S. money flown in, and it was flown in on C-130s, transports, and that money was very carefully counted when it was sent to Iraq, hit the green zone, and that's when they received their marching orders to disperse that money on the Cyprus Express in Cyprus banks. All right, I have the copy of his report, and guess what? Most of the folks on the Waxman committee, they're more than willing to come forward since their report was absolutely repressed. Now, and a closing note from me, Abu Sager, name might not ring a bell. Abu Sager was one of my assets. I recruited Abu Sager. He was Saddam Hussein's banker. Saddam Hussein's banker, and his daughter was also the mistress of Saddam Hussein. What he had to tell me was this, is that yes, the Cyprus Express exists, and here's how they're doing it, and here's why they're doing it. And he proceeded to tell me about the Bachi Bank, Bank of Credit and Commerce International, and he proceeded to let me know that basically all weapons of mass destruction had been purchased through that system, all right? The Cyprus Express system and the Bachi Bank of Credit and Commerce International system. Yes, there were weapons of mass destruction, as I've said on your show, and he confirmed the weapons of mass destruction that I had found and how they were purchased and transported.
Well,
all right?
Greg, I got to tell you something. You know, I always hate like hell to cut you off, but it's the 1 hour show limit. But these are definitely things that we're going to expound upon on the next episode. Janice, please give us a closing statement, if you would.
Well, I say this is what I think is very important, that all of this, from our experience, from all of it, including yours working with DoD contracts and Rebecca's background and everything, every bit of it, maybe people think, well, that's old information. But there's been no change, no challenge, no real challenge to all of these atrocities. And disappearing money and our budget with question marks all over the place. So it may be based in news that took place during 2013 and 2003, whatever the date you want to pick, but it means that it continues. Mm-hmm. And it's having influence on the laws and the actions that our elected and appointed officials can still use, like targeted assassination or imprisonment without cause. And it was tested and tried and not challenged in Iraq, and the wars are still going on. There's no reason to believe that those policies have changed in any way. And this is what we need to continue to discuss.
Oh, we are going to, believe me. For anybody who believes that when you give the government, okay, or those who control the government, because there's a lot, there are millions of people in the government in this country, and they're good people, and they truthfully believe they're helping this country. We're talking about the hierarchy. We're talking about the oligarchs who pull the strings, the puppet masters. If anybody here believes that if you give them an inch, they're not going to take a yard, well, I'm going to tell you that's wrong. They're not going to take a yard. They're going to take a mile. They're going to take a light year. And once they have a mechanism in their hand that can be used for any form of control, do you think they're going to give it up, or do you think they're going to expound on it and expand on it? These people have a lot of patience, okay? They will stretch that bounds an inch here, an inch there, an inch here, an inch there. We're talking about things that happened in 2001. 15 years ago. How far do you think those boundaries have been pushed? They've been pushed to torture in Iraq, to the unlawful, unconstitutional grabbing of U.S. citizens and assassinating them or locking them up forever. We are seeing a progression that has not stopped. Give them an inch, they're taking a freaking light year. I want to thank you very much, Gregory, for being here. You're always a pleasure. Janice, you're absolutely amazing. And yes, we will continue this series. We will do it at a point that's convenient for both you and Gregory. Rebecca, you're special. I mean, you're a phenomenal co-host, and I so much appreciate all the help and the effort you put into. And what most people don't know is Rebecca puts these shows together. I just come here and talk. Rebecca does the footwork. So she is special. For everybody listening, this has been TLBTV, brought to you by the Liberty Beacon Project. And please wake up, because if we don't eradicate the programmed ignorance, we have nobody to blame but ourselves. Thank you.